So, hello Monica, it's really great to have you here in Brieg to talk about interactive oral assessments. And would you like to start with telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm from Dublin City University. I'm the Dean of Teaching and Learning at DCU, short for Dublin City University. And we are quite an innovative university in terms of teaching and learning and assessment. And so we like to try out new approaches, innovative approaches, and see if they work for our students.
Great, so one of these approaches is interactive oral assessment. And I think it sounds like something that would be really useful for our university as well. What is interactive oral assessment?
Yes. Interactive oral assessment is a two-way unscripted conversation based on a real-world scenario. So the student comes along with their knowledge of a particular subject area, and the assessor has a chat with them, a conversation with them about that particular area. It's so you're not asking questions. It's not an oral exam when you're saying, why did you do this and how did you do that? It's more of a, that's interesting, tell me more about it. So it's based on a real world scenario. And the idea is that the students are extending and synthesizing their knowledge rather than just kind of repeating content.
Right, so that sounds really good for the going deeper, really getting to see whether the student has understood the material. But how do you make it rigorous then?
Yeah, so this is a question that comes up a lot, and so it's really important that you design a good rubric or a marking guide or a marking scheme for the interactive oral. So you decide what you want to assess, obviously based on the learning outcomes of the module. So you can pick between maybe 4, 5 or 6 kind of different criteria that you want to assess the students on. And then you will kind of clearly specify from, if it's a poor on a particular level up to excellent, and what the different levels are in between, so that the students can see clearly what's expected from them during the interactive oral assessment. And then there's, in DCU we have a community of practice for the interactive oral assessment lecturers, so they come along and they decide what they're going to do, what sort of scenario they're going to have for their students. We also make sure there's a sample scenario for students. We design the rubric, and often the first time you write your rubric, it's not the best rubric, so you have to go through several iterations to make sure you get something that's really clear, both to you as the assessor, so that you're sure you're assessing the correct things, but also for the students, so they can really see what they're going to be assessed on.
Right, doesn't that make it quite stressful for the students? How do you prepare them?
Yeah, so I think any assessment is stressful for students, but I think this is possibly less stressful than other ones because, as I said, we record a sample interactive oral assessment for the students, so they get a chance to see what it's really like, what type of questions, well, they're not questions, but what type of prompts or what topic areas will be explored in the interactive oral assessment. So we have quite a scaffolded or structured approach for students. So we show them the rubric or the marking guideline, we show them the sample video, and we get them to rate the student in the video to make sure that they understand, oh, that person was good in that, but maybe not so good in the second criteria. And if there's any discrepancies, you can discuss it with the students in class so that they come to kind of a shared understanding of what's expected. And because it's scaffolded along the way, when they actually do it, it's less awful than they think it will be.
Right, so that sounds good. On the teacher side, you mentioned community of practice and rubrics. What other support do you give the teachers? Because it sounds quite difficult to assess in this way. It's not something we're used to. What sort of support and preparation do you give the teaching? Yeah,
no, so it is innovative, and any time you're doing something new, it's always challenging. So at DCU, we have an interactive oral guide that is publicly available, so your colleagues are more than welcome to use it. And we have kind of structure there for academics and also for students. We say what guidance for before doing the interactive oral, how to prepare for it, the follow-up afterwards. We have a 6 or 7 stage process that we guide lecturers through. So that website, we also have a website that is publicly available that people can look at with a link to all the resources, sample rubrics, recorded videos, frequently asked questions. And we think this is a really great form of assessment, and we're very happy to support others and learn from others. The other thing about interactive oral assessment, it's actually quite flexible. So, you can range from maybe 10 or 20% up to 100%, and very different scenarios, so it can be quite creative as well. There is a lot of upfront effort, but it is really worth it at the end.
Right, so the resources will definitely link to them in our resource, so people will be able to access them.
Great,
That will definitely be helpful. Concerning, do you have a few examples you can share with us of what other teachers have done as interactive oral assessment? Yeah,
so we're very lucky in DCU. We have examples from across all our 5 faculties. We have a nice example in early childhood education where 2 students were working on early childhood literacy, and their interactive oral scenario was in a staff classroom once they'd gone out on work placement. And the assessor played the role of a senior teacher, and they were saying, "I've heard you've done something on early childhood literacy. Can you explain that a little bit more to me? And that sounds really interesting." And they would answer, and I wonder would it work in our school? So it was a real relevant example, because those students will be going out on school placement and they will be having discussions with colleagues. Another nice example comes from nursing. So previously a colleague had done a written exam for 2 or 3 hours explaining how a nurse manager would interact with a doctor, and it was very artificial because no nurse ever sits down for 3 hours and writes something. So in this interactive oral scenario, the nurse had to deal with patients with different diseases. They all had 2 problems, gout and diabetes, or heart attack and arthritis and whatever. And the nurse, the student, had to talk about the patient's case, either with a doctor, another nurse, a junior nurse, the family, the patient themselves. So there was a lot of variety there, and it was so authentic that it really worked well in that situation.
These seem very convincing examples. Sort of, it feels like it becomes a real natural discussion rather than testing your knowledge out of context.
Yeah.
So some of your classes, you said previously, were up to over 100 students.
Yes.
Is this scalable?
Definitely, I think so, yeah. So generally you would do interactive orals either individually or in pairs. Myself, I have done them in groups because it's been part of a module where they've done a lot of group work, so it's a natural fit. But even within a group, the students are marked individually according to each criteria, so that works quite well. My colleagues in Australia, in Griffith University, who are the leaders in this area, so they have done it with classes of up to 800 students, and they're currently looking at 1,600. Now, in that case, it's not one individual lecturer doing it, it's a team of assessors, but they all go through an upskilling process or a training process to be able to carry out the interactive oral assessment. So they will be familiar with the rubric, they would learn about interactive orals, they would have standard marking criteria, they would check that everybody understood the rubric and what a good student looked like compared to an excellent student. So there is an element of training or upskilling required there. But if you think of it, so say an individual interactive oral maybe might take about 10 minutes and maybe 5 minutes for marking and writing up. That's the equivalent of a 4,000 word essay. And because you have the person there in front of you, it's really obvious if they know their material and whatever. And if you think about the amount of time it takes to mark an exam, add up all the numbers, put it into the sum system and whatever your administrative process is, I'd say people easily spend 15 minutes marking and all the processing for an exam script. And it's much more enjoyable and much more authentic.
Right. So if one of our students, if one of our teachers wants to start with interactive oral assessments, where should they start? What should they do?
Okay, so first of all, I would say, have a look at the resources that are available for our website, which will be linked from your own website. Read the information, look at the videos, maybe find one from your particular discipline, so that because you can relate to that more. there will be resources available with the EduGL team here that you can consult. And maybe, if there's a community of practice or other people that you can connect with, to just ask those questions. Because when people start out, it's very innovative. They're not sure if it'll work. And they're all going, that sounds interesting, but I'm not sure. So if you have a community of practice or a support group, you can say, I'm thinking this, what do you think? Have you any examples? Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a rubric I can kind of copy or use as a base for my one. And then come up with creative ideas for the real world scenario for the student and also for the sample video. So there is a bit of upfront effort, but like in the long run, it's really worth it, because once you have done all the preparatory work, then it's very easy to reuse it again with the next cohort of students.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That sounds like a really interesting, innovative way of assessing students, which is leads to probably deeper learning, and motivated students, work skills that can be transferable, communication and so on. So I hope we'll be trying it out soon, and thank you very much for your support and being our first step into this community.
Great, pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Monica.